anytime you're involved with any kind of real estate transaction, you must speak to a lawyer for a couple of reasons. First of all, you can, for the most part, rely on the advice you're going to get from a lawyer. And secondly, if the advice is bad and you end up losing money, there is something called a lawyer's fund for client protection, which pays up to $300,000 for each claim. I served on that board for 27 years, and we gave millions and millions of dollars back to people who had been defrauded by attorneys. So there's no other way to emphasize the necessity in real estate deals to get yourself a lawyer. With me, of course, is Mike Vecchione, the chief of the Rackets Division, Richard Farrell, who's the unit chief of the Mortgage Fraud and Real Estate Crimes Unit, Assistant District Attorney Elizabeth Kurtz, Assistant District Attorney Lawrence O., Assistant District Attorney Andrea Clark, and Assistant District Attorney Frank Dudas. From the Special Investigations Unit, Chief Investigator Joe Ponzi, Supervising Investigator Michael Seminara, Detective Investigator Jeanette Chaudon, Detective Squad, Detective Shirley Chambers, and Detective Gerald Amato. We're also joined by one of the victims of these scams, who is Ernest Leak, who's a United States Army veteran and a former New York City firefighter. I was just mentioning to him, I had the privilege of being fire commissioner for 2 years. He missed, though. He got out in '76. So. A little bit more than 3 years ago, as a result of a federal appropriation obtained for this office by our United States senior senator from New York, Honorable Charles Schumer, we formed a mortgage real estate crimes unit within the Rackets Division. The unit was created as a result of concerns that I brought to Senator Schumer, that it seemed to us that we were in the midst of an epidemic of real estate fraud in Brooklyn. I think that epidemic has spread throughout the country. And in fact, Senator Schumer has sponsored legislation to create similar units throughout the United States. Today's announcement, which is literally a potpourri of fraud committed by fairly sophisticated criminal activity, the sum of these unrelated cases demonstrates the variety of fraud alleged, requiring continued vigilance by the fraud unit created with Senator Schumer's help. Since the unit was created in March of 2009, it has achieved many successes. We've opened more than 300 investigations and resulted in over 50 prosecutions, and I cannot stress enough the complicated nature of these investigations. In addition to obtaining 19 guilty pleas, the unit has tried 4 cases. Sentences have ranged from 1 to 36 years. Also, courts in these cases have ordered restitution in excess of $400,000, and 7 homes valued in the millions of dollars have been returned to their rightful owners. The cases that I announced this morning make it clear that despite the success of this fraud and real estate unit, its work has not been diminished. During 2011 and carried over to 2012, the unit opened 54 new investigations and brought 10 prosecutions, 7 of which I'll discuss this morning. These cases run the gamut from traditional fraud that is taking money that does not belong to the alleged criminal, to fraud involving abandoned property found, to fraud connected to identity theft, and a fairly new type of fraud meant to help people steal money from senior citizens who increasingly turn to reverse mortgages to provide them with an appropriate level of living expenses. Since reverse mortgage fraud is directed toward exploiting and victimizing an identifiable class of people, that is seniors age 62 or over, we've decided to use the hate crime statute, and that we find that that's appropriate and supported by both the facts and the law. Another new kind of fraudulent scam this investigation has uncovered is fraud by squatters in unmonitored and/or abandoned houses. The 7 cases I'll highlight this morning involve 12 defendants. In 2 of the cases, abandoned and unmonitored property were used to defraud a rightful owner. We allege, for example, that Nicholas Balcom engaged in criminal activity which included criminal possession of a forged instrument in the second degree, a Class D felony, and criminal trespass. In this case, our victim purchased property located at 434 Macon Street in Brooklyn. That property was in foreclosure, and according to the prior owner, was vacant. On January 1 of this year, the victim went to the Macon Street home and found that her keys did not fit the lock. She heard very, very loud music inside. She called the police, who found Balcom with two others living at the home, describing themselves as tenants of Mr. Balcom. Our investigation revealed that Balcom, who's 26 years of age, had exactly $1.82 in his checking account, but claimed he purchased the Macon Street property several weeks later. He then proceeded to produce papers, including a forged deed, which had not yet been filed. He also offered other forged documents, which purported to show ownership in 5 additional abandoned properties in or around Macon Street. The grand jury is currently hearing evidence about these additional forged instruments. In another case, Wilhelmina Smith was running an illegal rooming house at a location for which she had no lawful ownership. She provided no heat or hot water for her tenants, and when they refused to pay rent, Smith left threatening voicemails warning that she would take the front door off the hinges and evict the tenants. Smith has been charged with aggravated harassment in the second degree and unlawful eviction. In another case of vacant and unmonitored properties, Jonathan Smith, who is not related to Wilhelmina, stole 2 properties from the estates of 2 deceased owners. The properties were vacant and unmonitored. Jonathan Smith forged a deed giving himself ownership of 1 property located at 201 Cornelia Street with a value of $480,000. And using that forged deed as proof of ownership in the Cornelia property, Smith took a $10,000 down payment from a buyer. Smith never returned the down payment. In another scheme, Smith, assisted by a currently unidentified accomplice, stole the identity of someone named Kevins Lusant, someone with whom he had done business in the past. As part of the scheme, Smith and his accomplice created a fake deed to the property located at 865 Green Avenue in Brooklyn with a value of $660,000. The fake deed purported to transfer the property from the owner, Idalia Richards, to Smith, who was posing as Kevins Lusant. Incidentally, Miss Richards had died in 2009. Next, in November of 2010, Smith changed his role and claimed to be the representative of Lusant and contracted with Joseph Banda to sell 865 Green Avenue for $410,000. Banda gave Smith a $25,000 deposit toward the purchase. Shortly afterwards, Banda grew suspicious and canceled the sale, but he did not receive the return of the down payment or the deposit. Smith was indicted for multiple counts of grand larceny, identity theft, and forgery. He faces, upon conviction, more than 10 years in prison. As television advertising continues to promote reverse mortgages for seniors, it's become a growing problem. An example of a reverse mortgage is when a house owner seeks to obtain a mortgage based on the equity in his or her property. The money is repaid to the lender only upon the sale of the home or the death of the homeowner, in which case the ownership is transferred to the mortgage lender. Since reverse mortgages are only available to those over the age of 62, obviously all the victims are seniors. What we've decided in an appropriate case that we would identify a class of victims such as seniors who are vulnerable to reverse mortgage fraudsters, and would use the hate crime statute which enables the penalties against defendants whose crimes are motivated by a bias against a particular people. One example of this kind of reverse mortgage fraud involved an 81-year-old United States Army veteran and retired New York City firefighter, Mr. Ernest Leak, who's with us today and is willing to speak to you all afterwards. Mr. Leak owned property on Skillman Street in Bedford-Stuyvesant. We allege that Sal Luria and an unidentified accomplice went to Mr. Leake's home after he'd responded to a TV ad offering debt assistance. Mr. Leake was offered a streamlined mortgage at an extremely low interest rate. Mr. Leake was induced to provide his personal identification information, including his social security number. Loria and an imposter posing as Mr. Leake and using his personal information obtained a reverse mortgage on Mr. Leake's property in the amount of $350,000. Loria set up a fraudulent bank account and deposited the amount of the reverse mortgage payment. Soon, Loria drained the account with frivolous expenditures, including $75,000 at an Atlantic City casino. Loria is charged with grand larceny in the second degree as a hate crime, which exposes him upon conviction to an enhanced penalty of 8 1/3 to 25 years, as opposed to 5 to 15 years for a straight charge of grand larceny in the second degree. The investigation into the identities of the unknown accomplices continue. At times, the victim of mortgage fraud and the criminal are related. And so, for example, Margarita Alava and Glenn Clarence stole property from Alava's brother by forging his name on a deed. On the same day, they sold the property to Big Brooklyn Rehab, INC. Alava and Currents received $88,000 for the property. They've both been charged with grand larceny in the second degree and forgery in the second degree. Another example of relationship fraud involved Alvin Ashby, who in 2008 purchased and mortgaged 1091 East 91st Street along with his child's mother and grandmother. All three owners contributed to the monthly mortgage payment. Ashby later forged a deed giving himself sole ownership. He then attempted to take out a larger mortgage on the property and was prevented when one of the co-owners was alerted to the fraud. He's indicted for criminal possession of a forged instrument in the second degree. The final case charges 5 defendants with mortgage fraud. The defendants used 293 Franklin Avenue to steal hundreds of thousands of dollars. One of the defendants, Joseph Perlstein, was the owner of 293 Franklin Avenue and was carrying a mortgage that far exceeded its value. As part of the scheme, he transferred the ownership to himself and to 2 other defendants, John Rundell and Van Mobley. Rundell enlisted the aid of 2 other defendants, Renee Tenpo and Eleonora Temis, who were both loan processors, and they were asked to find a straw buyer. Soon they found a 59-year-old Russian-American home attendant from Sheepshead Bay who had little or no assets. The scheme required that the straw buyer's assets be misrepresented so that she could qualify for a mortgage loan in the amount of $1.6 million. Using the proceeds of the fraudulent mortgage loan, the straw buyer then paid Perlstein, Rundell, and Mobley for the property. The conspiracy was brought to an end when the straw buyer that came to our office to report that her identity had been used in an unrelated fraud in Nassau County. These cases demonstrate the wisdom of the support that Senator Schumer gave our office several years ago to create this specialty unit and to bring justice to those who defraud the citizens of Brooklyn. But I cannot emphasize enough that these frauds could be prevented by simply involving an attorney to advise you.
Hope, and I feel better that we see that these people is addressing the issue. So I don't feel that these people will walk away with that as easily as they had apparently thought. These people is working.
For you.